Friends, the story you're about to hear is a true story. It's the story of Michael McLaughlin, a young man who pleaded for help when he was a child, but to no avail. But let's let Michael tell us his own story.
When I was about 8 years old, my mother started dating, and I didn't even realize that she was dating. I was just a kid, and she was just bringing some guy around, would come visit us at my grandparents' house. And then one day, my mother said that we were moving out, and we were going to live with this guy. The guy's name was Art. And there was one time, it was nighttime, I don't remember if I was asleep and I had been woken up or what the deal was, but I was in bed. And I heard my mother scream. You know, evidently, Art had my mother in the bathroom and was not allowing her to leave. And Art said to her, and I remember it clear as day, he said, "Your skull would be real easy to crack." So the first thing I did was I went over to the phone and I dialed 911. And I told the operator that my dad was not letting my mom out of the bathroom and he was threatening her. And so then the police showed up. My mom came to the door and told the police that I had made it all up and that it was a bunch of lies and that it was just like a childish prank and the police, I guess, bought it or didn't feel like they had any other option. And so the police just left and I got beat. And I remember thinking as I was being punished in terms of my mother, just kind of thinking like, well, you're on your own.
What happened to Michael is just way too common in our society. When one partner starts threatening or hurting another, it often spills over onto the children. In the past 2 years, we've seen a 50% increase in domestic abuse cases. And what goes along with that? You guessed it, more and more children need our help. But what's really sad about Michael's situation was that his mom became an abuser as well. Why? We don't always know. But it's never excusable, and it's always tragic for children.
When I was in 8th grade, I went sledding with a friend of mine. When we came back to my house afterwards, my friend was ready to go home, and both our pants were covered with snow. We were all completely covered with snow, and my house was right there, so I went to give him a pair of pants. But I didn't have any clean pants, so I gave him a pair of Art's pants. My mom came up. She basically said that she couldn't believe that I would give the pants to my friend without asking and so forth. And she finally seemed like she was about to leave the room, and then she said, "Well, wait a minute, you don't have any clean pants." And I said, "Well, actually, they're Art's pants." And at that point, she went into a rage, and she went over, and there was a lamp on my dresser. It was a short, fat lamp, and she took that lamp with her hand, and she just slammed it into my head. And it was hard enough that she knocked me unconscious. And when I came to, she wasn't in the room anymore. I knew I'd been unconscious for a while because there was a lot of blood on the bed. I mean, a lot of blood. And went to school the next day, and sadly, not one teacher said anything to me about it.
When I heard Michael say that, I just wanted to jump up and say no. Yet silence is far too often the reality, and silence is the best ally of child abuse. Whether we want to admit it or not, child abuse happens in all of our communities. It's in our neighborhoods, and it may be in the seat next to us in church. I've spent my entire professional life working to raise that awareness and bring attention to the terrible injuries, physical and psychological, that children suffer at the hands of adults they should be able to trust.
You know, when people talk about abuse, I think that the image that a lot of people get is they think of physical abuse. And while that certainly is a problem for a child, I mean, nobody wants to get beat. I think that the psychological damage of abuse is at least as important, maybe even more of a factor on a child than the physical abuse. My mom would get angry with me and say things like, I can't believe that I wish you were never born. I just wish that you weren't here. I wish that you weren't my son. I'm ashamed of you. And I just don't know what to do with you. I wish I could get rid of you, but I don't know how. It was more psychological coming from my mother. Art was more just a bully picking at me. I always felt he was more of a physical threat. And my mom my mom's the one who gave me the scar, so she didn't have a problem laying hands on me, but she was more psychologically wanted to break you down and make you feel like you were nobody, like you were a complete zero.
One of the first things I learned 37 years ago when I started work at Children's Hospital was that the broken bones, the cuts and the burns of physical abuse, they can heal. But the emotional scars, those are different. As he told me, even if I'm not good at sports or I don't have a bunch of girls hanging around, I'm still a human being. Even so, none of this prepared him for being thrown out on the street at age 10.
The first time I was kicked out of my house, I was 10 years old, and she just told me, listen, you're out of here, you don't live here anymore, you have to find a new place, you just go. And as I said, I was 10, so I didn't really know how to process that. I just left. And I didn't know what to do, so I ended up going over to a friend's house. And the police officer shows up. So the police officer, I heard him tell my friend's parents that you have a runaway here. And I said, listen, there's been a misunderstanding. I didn't run away. I said, my mother, she kicked me out and told me that I needed to find someplace else to live. And the police officer said, well, parents say things like that all the time. And I said, well, that may be true that things like that happen with her. I don't know. But you weren't there when my mother was speaking, and she didn't say this in anger. I know the difference between somebody who says something in anger that they don't really mean and somebody who just calmly sits down and thinks about something and makes a decision. And he said, no, you're just a kid, He drove me back home.
In spite of being returned again and again to his mom and Art, Michael believed that one day he would walk away forever and go on to have a happy life. For thousands of children every year, Family Resource Center offers hope, the first step to them being free.
When I was 16 years old, things with Art and my mother came to a head. The last straw was when Art pulled the mattress from my bed, threw it in the basement, and told me that that's where I was going to live from now on. I knew then that I had to get out. I left with only the clothes on my back, and I ran and never came back. I ended up spending the night in some farm fields and under a tarp on a construction site until the next day I was able to make it to some friends who were able to help. It was maybe 1 or 2 weeks later, a police officer shows up at the cafeteria at the school and says, hey, I'm here to pick you up. You're a runaway. And so this time, I told the police officer, I said, well, you probably done this before where you had to pick up runaways. And I said, let me ask you, how many times did you pick up a runaway and the place you picked them up from was at their school? And he said, well, this is the first time. And I said, well, maybe that's an indication that there's a problem here. And I think that he did sense that there was something wrong. He didn't try to pressure me or tell me that I had to go home like previous police officers who made it out like there was no option or alternative. This guy basically said, look, if you don't want to go home, I can't force you to go.
Isn't that astounding? With his world crashing all around him, Michael still believed that his future depended upon completing his education. I said he was resilient, and he was determined to make that happen. It wouldn't be simple, but if he was successful, he would have a shot at a happy life he had always hoped for. Luckily, Michael finally encountered someone who took him seriously, and he never, ever returned home. I'm convinced that Michael's story would have been different if he'd had access to Family Resource Center's professional staff. We see thousands of children like Michael each year, real children with real pain and with real futures. But whether that future is sad and painful or happy and successful shouldn't depend on luck. Our staff knows how to help these children heal, but it takes people like you to ensure that Family Resource Center will be here. As I listened to Michael's story, I said a silent prayer of thanks for every single person who has ever helped us or will help us take care of these kids.